Thank you all for coming here in person, and for those who are joining on the live stream, thank you for being here. So as Anand said, I'm Shibani Shah, and while I'm alone up here talking about this topic on measuring research impact, I have not been alone in this effort. This has been a lot of people across the entire company who have contributed to this effort, and I want to give a special shout out to my colleagues, Elizabeth, Preston, and Paul, for their immense contributions to this. So with that, I want to start off with a little story. So I first started thinking and hearing about impact. This was fairly early on in my career. I happen to be at Intel, and we have a review process, our annual review process there, where we have to write our self-assessments. How many of you have to write your self-assessment? Yeah. Boy, I wish I had ChatGPT back then. So we even had a word count limit that we had to reach. And so I would spend hours writing and wordsmithing this document and writing about all of the accomplishments I had that year, writing in much detail all the projects I had done, and I sent it to my manager, and he sent it back, and he says, you need to add more detail. So again, I'm wordsmithing, really keeping that word count in mind, not to go over that. And I send it back, and then again, he sends it back to me. And this exchange is going on 3 or 4 times. And I'm like, finally, I went to him and I said, what's going on? What am I missing? And he says, Shibani, you're not talking about any of the impact that you're having with your work. And so that's when I started thinking that, oh, not only do I have to be writing about the impact, I actually need to know about the impact that my work is having. And so this is not just relevant to our self-assessments, right, in our companies, but this is also relevant to our resumes. There's a lot of information, a lot of advice out there around how do you write impactful statements in your resume? How do you quantify the work and the accomplishments that you've had? Because you really want to stand out from the pile of resumes that recruiters get. And last year, Anand, thank you, gave me this task, asked me to lead this mission that was given to us by our Chief Experience Officer, Amy Loki. And the mission was to define a measurement to assess the impact the UX research organization had across the business. And so this was great. I had been thinking about impact for a while now, but I hadn't quite been thinking about it from an organizational perspective at that point. So this talk is going to focus mostly on the organizational aspect and what we did to accomplish this mission. But a lot of what I'm going to be sharing today are things that I have learned over the years in my journey of figuring out how to write about impact myself. So this is relevant to you, whether you are like I was early in my career, thinking about impact and trying to figure out how do I even write about it. Or maybe you're a team of one and you're looking to show the value back to your organization to see if you can grow your team. Or if you're like us and we're a 130 plus research organization now, and we are wanting to show our value back to the business as well. Okay, so let me take you on our journey of how exactly we solve this. So there's a lot packed into this mission statement. So the first thing was we had to break it down into some of the key elements here. So the first one was impact. We really had to align on what a definition of impact was. Second was measurement. What is that one measure that was really going to encapsulate all of the impact that we were having as an organization? And then the third thing was, how do we scale this across the entire organization, across all of ServiceNow? So I'll take you through each of these step by step. So let's start with the first one. So the question we were asking ourselves is, how do researchers create impact? What does impact even mean for a researcher? So thankfully, there is actually quite a bit of research out there. There's a lot of documentation. Our UX research community is very smart. And there's a lot of publications. So like any other good researcher would do, we started with a lit review. And we read a whole bunch of information out there. We drew on our own experience, and we found out that a lot of people were saying essentially the same thing in many different words. So we boiled it down to a definition of what we thought would resonate well within our company of what research impact really means. And if you look up the word impact itself in the dictionary, it means to have a direct effect on something or someone. When it comes to research, what this means is that researchers create impact by influencing decisions that achieve a desired business outcome. So again, a lot packed in there, I'll say that again. Researchers create impact by influencing decisions that achieve a desired business outcome. And we felt like this did a really good job of summarizing all of the learnings we had, all the things that we had read about in our lit reviews. But what this means is that we really need to understand where the business is going. We have to be answering relevant questions that the business is asking. We have to understand where the company's strategy is so that we can be answering questions and providing data that matter to them. Okay, so we got the definition done. Next was figuring out, what is this measurement? What is that indicator that we could have that'll really encapsulate everything that we as an organization are doing, and we can show that? Well, it turns out that there is actually no one measure. When we think about impact, there are so many things that as a research organization we are doing, and it's really hard to encapsulate that in any one measure. So we did a bunch of stakeholder interviews, and again, a bunch of lit reviews, and we categorized these indicators into 4 key areas. So first was quantifying the work. And this just meant like we needed to look at all of the volume of work that we were generating. But then thinking about how is that work impacting the product? What action is being taken based off of the work that we did? And then evaluating the experiences based off of those actions that were taken. Have the experiences gone up? Have we improved them? And then measuring our own value back to our own customers, who are our stakeholders, our internal stakeholders. So I'll go through these one by one to give you a sense of the kind of indicators that we were included in each of these categories. But this is not going to be an exhaustive list. This is just the kinds of things that we've been thinking about. So the first one is, very simply, how many research projects have we completed? But this, just like I said early in my career, this alone is not going to help with showing the impact. Thinking about the number of users who we have engaged with. And this could be the number of users who you have spoken with. This could be the number of users you have surveyed. Just thinking again about the volume of people who you have included in your research. And then if you're like us, we're a very, very customer-driven company. So for us, thinking about who those top customers are is really, really important. So anytime we can show that, hey, we've spoken to these number of top customers in any given period of time, that's really great for us. And then also thinking about the project backlog. Now, this might not be an intuitive indicator to include here, but we included it because this helps us understand the demand on our organization. It's a proxy for us to understand what kind of demand is our company putting on our organization that we are not able to support with the current resources that we have. But that just means that they really love the work that we're doing and they want more of it. And so on. So you could come up with a whole number of other indicators that make sense for you and your organization, but that's to give you an idea of what quantifying the work means. So the next one is tracking action. And this is thinking about, what are the number of insights that you might have generated from your research project that have been adopted by the business? And then thinking about, once those have been adopted, how many product requirements have been created based off of those insights that have been adopted? And in our world, I don't know how it is for all of you, but our engineering requirements are in the form of epics, stories, and such. And then again, similar to a project backlog, we also want to look at our insights backlog. This is our area of opportunity for the business that we as a research organization have uncovered. This is an area where our product managers or our designers can come to and they can say, well, if we want to improve our product experience, what do we do? Well, here's a product backlog, or here's an insights backlog that we can start to tackle. And then also looking at the rate of action, meaning how many actions have been released or per release. And what this helps us understand is what is the rate of the uptake of our insights every release. So we might say, hey, the most recent release might have had more insights adopted compared to the previous release. That means we're having more impact in that particular release. Okay, and so on. The next one is around evaluating experiences. So once action has been taken, these insights have been incorporated into the product, we want to understand how has it moved the needle on the actual end user experience. And so we have very standardized controlled studies that we run here, which are called UX quality assessments. And we gather a number of different scores here, so like our usability score, design quality, we measure our task success rates, we look at the time on task and such. But that's really helping us release over release to be able to measure how we are doing and how the impact of our research insights led to the action that ultimately led to a better, or not better, but that's exactly why we need to run these experiences. And then the next one is measuring our value. And this really goes down to thinking about how are we positioning ourselves and how are our stakeholders thinking of us within the organization. And these could include things like what kind of value, what do our product decision makers, what do they think about the value that we're adding to their ability to make product decisions? Or the timeliness of the insights that we're providing to them. Are we getting there right in time so that they can make the product decisions that they need to be making in the time that they need to make it in? Or are we too late to the party? And then their overall satisfaction with the quality of the work that they're getting or the quality of the relationships that they have with us. And then their likelihood to engage with us in the future. Okay, and so on. So altogether, we've got these 4 categories and a number of different indicators within them that holistically give us this view of what research impact means for us as a research organization. But this might not all be relevant to you or your organization. So something for you to think about is, what are those indicators that make the most sense for you within your world? Okay, so moving on to the business. Now this, I will say, of all the 3 things, this was the hardest part for us. There were a lot of challenges in figuring out how we scale this across the entire business. Us as individuals, it was relatively easier to say, okay, here's what I did, but then how do we do this across the entire organization with the number of different products that we have, the number of different teams that we are supporting? So I won't go through every single challenge because there was a lot, but I'll go through the 3 main ones that we faced. So the first one is that our insights were really siloed. Our researchers, we create research reports, and these could be in PowerPoint decks, they might be in a Miro, they might be in Word docs, and they live all over the place. So it's really hard for us to figure out and quantify how many insights are we generating as a research organization. There's no way to calculate that, no way to measure that. And the second one is it was hard to track the action. We didn't know how one insight led to one product decision. And so we had to actually manually go back. We would go back like 3 months after a release, we might go back and say, hey, PM, what happened with that insight that I shared with you about 3 months ago? And they'd have to rack their brains and think, oh, what did I do with that? What kind of decision did that help me make at that time? So it was really hard. It was manual. It probably wasn't very accurate either. And then the next one was, as you saw, we have a lot of these indicators, right? But they all live in a lot of different places. So how do we bring it all together and put it in one consolidated view so it was easy for us to summarize and see the kind of impact that we were having as an organization. So fortunately, we were able to solve all of these problems, and even better, we solved it with our ServiceNow products. So for the very first one, our challenge around insights being siloed, we are using our own product, which is called Strategic Portfolio Workspace. And we're using this to store all of our research insights. So the process that we have in place in our organization is that as soon as a researcher completes a research project, they log their insights here in this repository. And this way, because it's all centralized, it is like one gigantic database where anybody could come in, they could look across any time period. They could filter based off of persona, based off of the product, the business unit that they were interested in. They could really look at this from any way that they wanted to, because it's all organized in one central repository. And even better, and I'm happy to share this, as of our latest release, which is called our Xanadu release, we have our Gen AI capability called Now Assist integrated into SPW, Strategic Portfolio Workspace, where anybody could come in, they can click on a few of these records, and it generates a summary for them. So this is not only helpful for us as a research team, but really helpful for our cross-functional partners too. So imagine a PM wanting to know, what do they prioritize? Or of the 100 insights that they have, that they've been given by their research partners, how do they know what to prioritize? How do they know what to figure out, what to do about? And this really helps them. Okay, so the next challenge was hard to track action. And like I said, we really had no tool to do this. And our process was, so we have, our own homegrown tool on ServiceNow platform to be able to log our research projects. And once those projects are completed, our researchers log the insights. But this is where we needed the help here. This is where the challenge was, where we had no ability to connect those insights to any specific product requirement, which means we weren't able to quantify the impact. And so thankfully, again, using that exact same product, Strategic Portfolio Workspace, it's a little tiny there on the screenshot, but on the top right, there's a green box there that says Link Product Idea. So this is where we can take our insights and we can link it to a product requirement like a story or epic, and that's what we can use then to measure how many of our insights got adopted and how many of those resulted in some sort of product outcome. All right, and then the last one, which was around having no high-level view. And so we've created this dashboard. Unfortunately, I can't, for confidentiality reasons, show you what exactly that dashboard looks like, but imagine it looks very similar to this. So now we have a dashboard that summarizes automatically what each of those indicators that we talked about in one view. All right, so I've been talking a lot about ServiceNow products, but I want you to know that this doesn't have to be only on a ServiceNow product. You could use any tool. This really is a spectrum. So you could start with something that is just as rough as a Miro or a Word document or a PowerPoint. Or you might use something more mature like a Excel or Airtable or Smartsheets where you can automatically generate reports from there. Or you might have the ability to have more automated tools like ServiceNow, Tableau, or Power BI. But don't let the tooling stop you. Just start tracking. Start tracking your work with whatever tool you've got. Okay, so we talked about the insight. We aligned on a definition. We figured out all of the measurements, all of those indicators that we need to put in place. And we even figured out the tooling. So we thought, okay, this is great. We got it all figured out. But then what happens if nobody's going to use it? There's no process in place. So we needed to figure out, how do we operationalize this across our whole 130-person organization? And there were a lot of processes that we ended up putting in place, but I'm going to share one with you that I think has really moved the needle for us. And I chose this particular one because in my career, I've seen that, and we even here at ServiceNow, we fail to do this part of the process, which is really following through on the research results. And so I'll share more about this. And what we're calling this is dispositioning rituals. And no, we didn't make the name up, disposition. It's an existing term. What it means is to transfer to the care, possession, or ownership of another. And so when we're thinking about this in terms of research impact, what this means is that we want to dedicate time. We want to dedicate time to align on action based on the research insights. So what happens typically is that someone might log a research record, they'll complete it, they'll complete the research project, they'll log their insights, but then it's this piece that gets missing. We're not able to track the action then, and therefore we're not able to quantify the impact that we've had on the product. And so this is where the dispositioning rituals come into play. So something for you to think about too in your own worlds too is how can you have intentional conversations about insights that lead to some kind of action so that those insights are not sitting on a shelf somewhere and collecting dust? But you need to be able to carve out that time, that space to do it. But it also means that it's a shift in our practice. It's a shift from going from running a research project, doing your readout, and then going away. You have to stay connected with your team. You have to follow through and continue along on that journey with your cross-functional teams. So there are 3 considerations for healthy dispositioning rituals, and it's these dispositioning rituals that really help us stay connected throughout the process. So I'll go through each of these. So the first one is timing. This might seem a random question, but I promise it's very relevant. How many of you are familiar with the development cycle in your companies? Okay, well, that's great. That's really awesome. And in order for us to maximize the value, maximize the impact that we're having in our organizations, it's really important for us to understand this development cycle. And so I'm going to give you an example of what one such development cycle might look like. So this is a quarterly release cycle. We often follow this at ServiceNow, and we have planning sessions. These happen at the beginning of the quarter. And for these dispositioning rituals, what we want to make sure we're doing is figuring out when those planning sessions are happening and bringing our research insights from the previous quarters or quarter, as well as the backlog, into those discussions. It is that moment in time when your cross-functional partners are open, they're thinking, they're listening, they have the mental capacity to actually hear you out. Because sometimes if you catch them in the middle of a release cycle, it can get pretty busy. They're already so preoccupied with things. And I'm not saying don't do this even after your research readout, but continue to do it. Stay involved even after your research readout. And this is when you can stay involved and you'll have a lot more impact here in these moments. And so you want to do this every single time there is a new planning session. You want to keep bringing in your insights and keep showing up, keep bringing that backlog back into view. Because your cross-functional partners have a lot going on. They may not remember, so it's your job to remind them and to resurface those insights. So something for you to think about is, that's great that so many of you know what the development cycle is, but think about what is the cadence of these planning sessions? When does that happen? How often are those occurring? And can you get yourself in that room? Can you be prepared for those conversations and be there to share those insights? Okay, so the next one is insights. Now, having a really, really clear perspective on what the insight is that you found will really help your team focus on the action that needs to be taken. And to have a really well thought out insight means that it has to have a few elements. And so we've come up with this statement here. It's a generic statement, but it goes like this, which is, A persona that we've studied, experiences a particular problem because of this reason. And as a result of this is the consequence. And this really helps your cross-functional teams understand and empathize with why this is a problem for this persona and why does it matter so much to solve this. What is that problem? What is that pain that it's causing them? And you may be familiar enough with the product space where you have the ability to come up with your own action based off of that insight. And that's great. You, by all means, should be providing your perspective on what you think the recommendation is here. But in some cases, you may not. And that's okay too. But this is where you really need to be bringing in your cross-functional partners together to be discussing that action. But it is your responsibility as the person who is the closest to the end user to be that voice of the user and really clearly articulate what that insight is. What is that user problem? And so you might have many such insights, and that's great. But again, here, you need to have a very clear perspective on what is the priority of those insights. If your organization is anything like ours, we might generate 10 insights from any given study, but only 5 are going to make it into the next release. So we have to be very mindful and very clear about what is the priority of the insights that we believe should be going into the next release. And you present that priority to your team. Okay, so let's say you've prioritized these insights and you bring them into these dispositioning rituals. Let's say you're in your Q1 planning session with your team. And what might happen is you're having a collective discussion with your team members, and they might take an insight and your PM might say, hey, this is a really great idea. Let's plan for this. Let's put this in our very next release, in our Q1 release. Awesome, that's action. And that's adoption. The next one, maybe they'll say, hey, this is not quite as clear to me, or I'm not quite convinced with that. I need some more information, I need more data. So maybe you need to go back and you need to design another study. And maybe that's going to take you a couple quarters, but you need to remember to come back in a couple quarters and bring that back again in the next planning session. And maybe that it was a good idea, but they don't have time for it in that particular release. They say, let's just put that in the backlog. But then it's, again, your responsibility to bring that backlog back into view. Don't let your teams forget about it. And maybe you have an insight that's really great and they do want to adopt it, but at a future release. But that's great, that's still a win. And in some cases, they might come back and say, well, maybe this doesn't make sense for our business. Maybe the timing's not right. Let's not pursue this, but that's okay. But look, because you have dedicated the time to have these sort of dispositioning rituals, you now have action against all 5 of your insights. And that's what this purpose of this particular dispositioning ritual is. And last, but certainly not least, is collaboration. We have a value here at ServiceNow, which is win as a team. And we hold this true even as researchers. And we know that collaboration is so important when we are conducting research. We want to bring our partners in for observing these sessions, but it's true even after. Right? We really want to maintain those partnerships with our stakeholders. And, if they don't like you for whatever reason, well, you have to figure that out. And you have to build that partnership. You have to build that relationship with them, because then they will listen. So an example of a collaborative process might look something like this. You might come up with your research report, and you do this big presentation to the broad team of people. And then you may want to invite a smaller group of those decision makers into a room to have a deeper discussion. And this is where you bring in your prioritized list of insights and you reshare those. And you have a deeper discussion then about what is the action that we can take based off of these insights. And you want to document those decisions. Because once you've documented it, then you know that's something that you can actually measure. And also, very, very important, maintain a backlog. You may not get 100% adoption in that first go. and that's okay. But maintain that backlog so then you can follow up on those insights. So again, here, there is a spectrum. You know your stakeholders best. There are some of our teams that have very formal dispositioning workshops. They have all sorts of templates and such, and that works for them and their stakeholders. In some cases, maybe there isn't time to do that. Maybe they're just leveraging a recurring team meeting that they have to have those discussions. Or in some cases, maybe there isn't enough time to align with everybody because maybe everyone's on different time zones, or it's difficult to find one single time where everybody can get into a room together. Whatever that reason might be, maybe you just choose to do asynchronous communication. Well, that's okay too. So again, just like tooling, collaboration and communication is on a spectrum too. So we talked about having very clear insights. Oh, and so something for you to take away and think about is what collaboration model really works best for you. There really is no one way, right? Everyone's stakeholders are different. Everyone's relationships with their stakeholders are different. So coming back to our definition of research impact, we talked about timing. And like I said, timing is so important to be able to be in the room, to be able to influence those decisions. But you also have to have that clear insight. If you're not coming in with a clear point of view, no one's going to hear you. And then really having those strong stakeholder partnerships. Develop those relationships. Those are really, really key. And that is how you will start to influence those decisions, which will then ultimately achieve a business outcome, which ultimately will lead to research impact. Okay, so I've said a lot of things about measuring research impact, but if there are only 3 things that you take away today from my talk, it's first that you need to identify the indicators that make sense for you. Whether you're an individual trying to show impact for yourself, for your own work, or you're an entire organization, you're representing an organization and you're trying to do this for the team. Figure out what those indicators make sense for you. And then don't let the tooling slow you down. Use any tooling that you've got, any tool that you have. Start tracking. And timing and collaboration are key. If you miss those windows, or if you don't have good partnerships, you're not going to be able to influence those decisions. Okay, with that, thank you.